Oh, I don't know.
How the hell is WWE?
Hello?
Hey, Mike, you got me?
Yep.
How are you?
Not bad.
Nice, good to hear. How'd the move and stuff go? I know that was a while ago, but
Oh, pretty smooth. Pretty smooth. Yeah. We've actually been here for a year now.
that's funny. My perception of time is highly skewed.
So what have you got going on here?
So, maybe as just a quick refresher, obviously, you know how we have essentially two flows for inventory. One being consignment,
Right.
one being retail.
Right.
We'd like to allow brands to use our service to essentially provide their customers with a resale platform. So obviously we provide our customers with a resale platform. If we were going to power it for another brand, the way we do it is kind of in a white label way, right? Where there would be branding on the brand side to say, hey, this is what we do. But then the back end is we're powering it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me share my screen for a second.
Okay.
And bring up a company that does that now with us called Stio. And they're an apparel brand. And basically what they do is they just send us boxes full of shit for customers, and then we resell it. But from their side, I wanted you to kind of see the the experience, if you will. Let's see if it's at the bottom of their page. I believe it is. Yeah, they call it second turn. So basically what they're telling their customers is really simple. They're like, gather up your shit, send it into Stio, and then Stio is going to give them a gift certificate off of new products from Stio, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the play here for them is like customer retention, right? Then they take all this crap that they get from their customers and they send it to us, and then we sell it, right?
Right.
And the way we do that is kind of via retail. So right now, let's see if I have a recent PO up. So right now we get all this stuff and we create a PO under a vendor. So for instance, we have a PO for Stio. We have a few POs for Stio since they have a lot of stuff with us. And it's tied to the vendor, right? So if you look at the vendor, it says Stio, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll zoom in a little so you can see better. And then this is just all the stuff under here, right? All the items that they send us. You know, we got a bunch of shit. So if we were going to do this with other brands, we would want to kind of automate it further. And what we would do is we would essentially take them through our flow, just like our flow on the front end. But this would exist on like a subdomain. So let's say if somebody was on another site, like a ski site, like Dynastar Skis or something like that, we would, let me log in so you can see the real experience. So we would like power, we'd spin up a subdomain like dynastar.geartrade.com, and on the Dynastar site, there'd be branding that would say, sell your gear or trade in your gear, yada, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
And we would take them to this page here, right? So they can create a label in a box, or drop it off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they could set up and create a PO. However, we don't want that person to go through the normal consignment process. Like, we're not going to offer them in this scenario, we're not going to offer them the ability to like accept or adjust price. We're not going to offer them, they're not going to have an account on Gear Trade. Therefore, all this stuff that we have for our customers in regards to what we offer for consignment is not going to be available to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we still need record of the items that we get from the brand. So my thought is have them kind of follow a retail flow. So the only thing that would exist essentially is this page on the other brand's website, like, and then you would click on it and it would take you to like dinastar.geartrade.com. And we would create a PO for that person there. But ideally, that PO would be nested underneath a vendor. And so I just close up my NetSuite tab. NetSuite tab here. So for instance, if you go to the vendor page, which is Stio, right here, well, the manufacturer is Stio, but the vendor Stio, let me show you where that is. The ideal state would be that you're on the vendor page, and every customer that creates a PO with the brand, whether it's Stio or Dinastar or whoever, the North Face, would be loaded into like the vendor page, and that's just taking forever to load for whatever reason. I don't know if like under here, under transactions, if there's a way to just see purchase orders. Let me see. So vendor PO history. Yeah. So, yeah. So we would just on the vendor page, we would create POs that are related to this vendor. And then we would stack them here essentially, and then, you know, add items to that. So every PO, there would be a large list, right? This would get pretty long because each customer would represent a PO, correct?
Well, I mean, I'm not entirely sure I understand what you're trying to do with it. So, I mean, PO. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to make these people be able to do with you licensing them that website. They then can do what you're doing and sell things on consignment as well.
Yeah, but we don't want them. Okay, so we don't want them to follow the consignment flow.
Understood, but I'm just saying you're basically giving them the capability of doing the same thing that you're doing.
Correct. So the way we think about it is that these will be received as retail items, and what we sell them for versus what we pay out will be done separately, not like how we have it automated with consignment now. Each brand, you know, is probably going to have their own terms, right? So like paying out brands won't be, it'd be nice to get it to be partially automated, but every brand is probably going to have a different agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it'll just be based, each brand will just be based on whatever terms that we strike.
So then all you're trying to do is use the PO to track, to tie it to that particular vendor, and then track what that particular customer sent in. So if
Yep.
if 1,000 customers though send in items, then there'd be 1,000 POs, correct?
Yep, correct. So there's basically two parts to this. We want to nest POs under a vendor, which seems like you can do that here, right?
Mm-hmm. POs are always tied to a vendor, so yeah.
And then we want each PO then tied to their customer. So we'll have their name and email address. And I don't know how to kind of essentially tie it to two people, right? You want to tie it to the vendor, but the PO needs to be tied to the person as well. So for instance, this is a STO PO. So on that PO, we want to be able to see that customer information as well. So let me pull that up. So my guess is, since it's already tied to STO, the vendor, that we'll want to create some type of custom field in here that comes up like right away. And maybe it's under the memo that we have the person's name, address, and email address. And maybe that all comes up as memo or something. And then we can start building items to that PO, right? Just like any other PO.
So then are you paying out the vendor or are you paying out the customer?
We're paying out the vendor.
Okay. So then that's one big problem solved.
Yep. So we need to there needs to be like some transparency into all the customers that sent them stuff, or I should say sent us stuff that sold, and the payouts to them. So in my mind, there's maybe something that we create in the front end or potentially our back end to kind of like aggregate all that, right? I mean, instead of just having it be this fucking total here, right? That's the total amount of stuff. It's not the total sold. So ideally there's a little bit of automation there. That makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if you know, but we've essentially created a tool to really speed up the listing process. And we would probably utilize that tool to then list items on these POs as well. As long as we have the PO number, I think we should be totally fine. So the key would be to, every time we create a PO for the brand, that we make sure that's tied back to the brand, right?
Yeah. The difference between how you're doing things now and how you would do things here is it would be always be the vendor ID would stay the same for this particular vendor. And so all the POs would be created with that vendor ID, which then would keep them all under this vendor's record.
Yeah.
Which is pretty standard.
That's what I figured. So like obviously POs can nest under a vendor. And then the second part is that vendor ID just always stays the same.
And then you just need, well, and the PO automatically, nest under the vendor, as you put it, because you're giving it the vendor ID. So it'll always be that vendor's PO, which is the standard way that retail is handled in an ERP anyways. You know, if you're buying from, in this case, Stio, if you're buying if they're sending you products, then you would have a PO that you'd issue to them that then tells them what to send you. So the only thing you're doing differently is you're populating that thing once the customer ships you over the product. So that makes sense. And what do you need the customer information for?
Well, we want to give the brand transparency, right? So like if somebody calls the brand and is like, hey, I shipped you guys a pair of skis, and then, you know, brand reaches out to us and they're like, hey, did you get these skis from so-and-so? We have to have a way to look that up. You know what I mean? Because right now it's really easy to look up by PO number, right? And we'll assign people PO number, but let's say if they don't have their PO number, then we need to be able to like figure out a way to search it, ideally global search it, and it will come up in a custom field, because I don't know if memo is global searchable.
No, that makes sense.
Do you know if memo is global searchable? Ideally, it would be like right in here, like right on the PO. You'd have the customer name, and maybe it's in here, right? I don't know, but it needs to be attached to the PO. That's the question, is where should we attach it, really? Customer name, address, email. I don't know where you think you would potentially do that, but
Yeah.
and then the other thing is trying to automate payout to the vendor. It'd be nice to have some type of at least a report. So you like build a report with sales and their cut, right? So they sell $100,000 worth of shit, their cut's 50%, and then they get 50 grand. And then maybe that's all built out in a report in here that's easy to access, right? Maybe it's just ends up being a save search. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So from first glance, it doesn't seem like it's too much, especially since we're not doing anything on the front end, right?
Right.
It's all getting listed as retail items. So we don't need to like, screw around with, any of the rules, right? Like after X amount of days, it goes into the status. You have to have people accept and adjust price. You give them the option to donate or send back, right? There's none of that. Although there will be rejected items. And those, I'll have to talk to Aaron about how we want to deal with those. Maybe we just donate those. They get auto donated. Is there a vendor view, which like it's basically the vendor view normally? Correct me if I'm wrong. I guess the vendor view normally is like this, so you could kind of like scroll and see what you want to see, right? Like items. Maybe it's open purchase orders by item or something like that. No. Yeah, looks like some of that doesn't really work. Or doesn't show us anything at least. So maybe there's something here we're not taking advantage of that we can take advantage of, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you just go here, dear. Yeah, it's weird that there's no items to show. You would think that it would just be a big list. So it looks like the only way you show all the purchase orders is that one thing that I found. I can get back to it.
Vendor bio history.
For some reason that shows it all. So so that's that. What are your thoughts?
Well, it doesn't seem too difficult. The one thing I keep thinking about though is that and I have to give this some thought. If there's a subdomain that's like, whomever.geartrade.com.
Yeah.
The problem is that API calls usually are required to come from one domain for security purposes, obviously. So I have to see if there's an easy way around that. There probably is. Because, we have to create API keys that authenticate the call every single time. So if we had an endpoint and it was being called and another vendor calling the same endpoint, that can become problematic. We also have to avoid any kind of issues with going over the limits with NetSuite. But I mean, it doesn't seem super complicated. I mean, in a sense, all you're really asking for is that any call that come, and we'd probably do like some kind of config on every single one of these subdomains, or there'll just be a config file where you fill in like their vendor ID, and then every time customer requests the sending in a product or products, it would pass that vendor ID in so that when the purchase order is created, it's automatically tied right to that same vendor every single time. That part's really, really easy. And so it would just like for your onboarding process, you would, obviously do everything you need to do to create the subdomain and style it how they want it. It's, brand it the way they want it, et cetera. But then you just set the vendor up in NetSuite as well, so that they're there. It would give you a vendor ID. You pop that into the config file, and then write the code that calls the endpoint so that it picks that up. Now, I assume your guys are going to handle the website side of this.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, send over what you've got here and I'll talk to the team tonight and see what we think as far as how long this is going to take. I'm really slow. I'm getting out of the NetSuite business entirely and moving into more of other things that I was doing. So we'll see what they think, but I think this is something they could handle rather quickly because it's not overly complex, so to speak.
Yep. I'm just gonna send you my notes on this.
Yeah, perfect.
Sorry, they're rough notes,
Oh,
but
you do what I do though. You're emailing them to yourself.
do
I
that
do
all-
the same. I do the same thing, then I process them later.
Yep. Basically, it's POs coming from another source. There you go.
Perfect.
And I see you're recording this anyway, so you have all
Yeah,
the-
yeah, that's why I recorded it, because it's easier than saying, I know he said something about that, but I don't remember what it was.
Yep.
But,
Cool. So what have you been getting into mostly now that you're moving on to NetSuite?